as you know, every year we mix up the speakers, we mix up the panelists, we mix up the topics. Every single year, except the one person we always bring back every year is Alan Hardcastle. And that is because, first of all, he's my left brain. And I know he's probably tired of me saying that. Okay, but secondly, every year he has a new project that's a best practice. Now, over 8 years' time, that's pretty amazing, don't you think? So I just remember back to when we did our first skill standards in 2006, and he was with WSU, social science then, and he called me. He was so amazed after doing that. That was the power plant operators and mechanics. He was so amazed that there was so much work to be done in the workforce side of energy that he was just, I think, awestruck. Totally. He said, what would you think about moving, if I moved to WSU Energy program? I'm like, yeah, then we have you captive. That works for me. So we have had him captive for 7 years. But it always amazes me when I walk into his office and he actually has other projects on the board. But at any rate, we have a first-rate panel here. Thank you all for traveling. They all had to travel different states here, different utilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan to moderate the last panel of the day. Thank you all for hanging in there.
Great. Thank you very much, Barbara. Those of you in the back, please do come up. We want to have a more intimate setting with our panelists today. And if you're closer, you can engage better. So I invite you to join us in the front chairs here. First, I want to thank the sponsors of this event, which has happened every year for how many years, Barbara? The 8th year. And especially in the energy sector, I can't think of a better champion for the work that we all do collectively than Barbara Hinz-Turner. So let's start with a round of applause for Barbara. Again. We're also very fortunate to have very competent staff at the Center of Excellence, at the RETC, and our partner organizations that really make all this work possible. I want my colleague in crime here, Sally Zeiger-Hansen, to stand up because she's been a real foundation for me at the energy program. We do a lot of work there, as Barbara mentioned. It's so much more enjoyable to have competent people working with you, and it makes it all possible. And of course, our industry partners, our labor partners, which have supported all of this work, have been invaluable in making sure that, that we do this high quality work that supports a real need in this industry for high quality education and training that prepares our workforce for the future. And Barbara has already been mentioned, and I'm really looking forward to the crab feed tonight. Are you up for that? Yeah, I know Bob and a gang of 5 or 6 people worked all yesterday to get that crab going. I don't know if any of you noticed as you came here today, if you got off the off-ramp and you started coming over, there's a little handmade sign there that said fresh tuna and had a phone number. Now, I'm not sure if that's Bob Gunther's competition or if he's trying to diversify, but I think we're going to find out tonight what he has in mind. Okay. So the purpose of this presentation today is not so much for me to talk, although to introduce some of the preliminary findings of the research that we're doing, but to hear from people who are in the industry dealing with these issues all the time. So I'll be very pleased to introduce our panel in a few moments. I do want to say that Angelique Keaveney, who, from Idaho Power, who wasn't able to be here today, had a sudden death in the family. So obviously she needs to be with her family today. So we're very sorry to hear about that. I want to provide at the outset some regional context. This is a follow-on to a research project we did in 2008 to try to understand trends in the, especially in the utility industry, but in the electric sector industry. We don't try to cover all the jobs, all the sectors, all the occupations in the energy field, but we think these are very important foundational partners for us and the focus of our work. And I think it's very important that we take a look at what's going on in our industry partners, because that sets the stage for where those job openings are, where we should be tailoring our curriculum and our training programs so we best meet the needs, the current needs and the future needs of our employer partners. So I'll talk a little bit about the labor market that we've collected to date. I will say it's incomplete. We're still collecting information, so these numbers may change. But I think there's some consistent trends that you'll find to be of interest and that will take us into the panel to provide some reaction to those numbers, as well as to talk about looming issues that they're dealing with all the time. And again, as I mentioned, none of this would be possible without our industry and labor partners. These are the organizations that participated in this very specific electric sector survey, and there are others that we're courting to join us in the Northwest region, covering these 5 states. So again, this is not all the potential jobs in the energy sector. It's a fairly specific sector, but it does represent a lot of employment and a lot of partnership in our region. So again, tying our programs and offerings to demand that's going on right now and finding out where the industry itself believes it's going, we thought was very, very important. Now, in my review, both in 2008 and in this year, in terms of the national trends that are happening, you heard a lot about those already this morning. We know that there are impending retirements in large numbers, and we know that there's a lot of discussion about knowledge and skill gaps. So that has framed a lot of the conversation, and it certainly framed the research that we conducted here in 2013. Now, there are lots of other issues related to these 3 factors, but these tend to be discussed a lot in the circles that we roam in, and certainly for our employer partners, they're very important and certainly shaped the study in its current form. I want to provide some context, though, some regional context, because understanding the importance of those 3 issues really makes more sense if you understand what's going on here in the Pacific Northwest in terms of what is industry comprised of, what are the kinds of issues that we're facing, and what do we look like in terms of the composition of our own industry. So let me take you through that fairly quickly. First off, it's important to recognize that we're looking primarily at utilities with some additional partners such as BPA and Bureau of Reclamation. Now, utility employment across the 5 states is large, but it's not enormous. It's not like manufacturing where we have several 100,000 employers. But as we all know, we are an industry that is absolutely essential to the economy of all these other industrial sectors. So we're very important. We all know that. It is important to recognize that the numbers I'm going to present does not touch upon suppliers, indirect employment, or induced employment, as economists like to talk about, that are generated as a function of the employment in this industry. I mean, I've seen multipliers that are 2 to 3 times the value of an individual job in the utilities passed about. That wasn't our primary goal, but suffice it to say that utility employment and related employment has far more implications for employment and economic growth in our region than just the employment in utilities themselves. But they're an important driver. What's notable about this slide, if you look at it, is that the number has hardly changed in terms of employment since the last time we did this survey. It's been relatively flat, which is interesting because we all know that we've gone through a recession. And so there's something to be said about that. There's something to be said about stability in this industry, even though we've had our ups and downs. But overall, the trend is relatively flat in terms of numbers over the last 4 years. Now, if we look at utility payrolls, the contribution of just our utility industry to the economic growth in our states, again, this payroll data doesn't include economic multipliers, which you can imagine is quite large. But our initial estimates of federal and non-federal payrolls shows that utilities alone account for over $3 billion annually in the Northwest region. Now that's pretty big impact by any measure. And again, this does not account for all the induced and indirect economic value that's added by our utility partners, suppliers and others. We also know that these are good jobs. These are jobs worth protecting and trying to grow. Utility wages and benefits are among the highest in every state. And here you see the difference if you just compare all wages to utility wages. These are great jobs with great benefits and good stability and growth. We want to keep these jobs. Now, these are all utility wages. These are non-federal jobs that I have here, so it's a limited sample. But the point needs to be emphasized, perhaps not so much to you, but to people outside of the energy industry, that these are excellent jobs with excellent potential that we need to pay attention to. But we also know we have some challenges ahead. Now, this data is from CEWD, which is a national picture. One challenge, obviously, is that we're all getting older. We've heard about the retirements and the baby boomers heading towards the retirement cliff. These are pretty sobering projections about what lies ahead nationally. Now, it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago that what we heard was 50% or more of the entire utility workforce is going to retire in 5 or 6 or 7 years. I would say that the recession changed all that. That was a game changer. What it meant for many people who were considering retirement is they saw their pensions and their investments go way down. Nothing like that reality to delay retirement plans, or at least moderate your retirement plans somewhat. I will say that even with that, this recent survey by CEWD found that there's still potential replacements of a third of current employment in some occupations, like some engineering occupations, including technicians, operators, engineers. So the bottom line here, regardless of what the precise number is that we certainly still have a challenge by any measure. And this is still a concern for our employer partners. And this is identically what we heard when we had these interviews with our employers, is that they are re-concerned now about what will happen as more people are of retirement age than they were 4 years ago, even though they've stayed. What has been the impact of that? What does it mean? So if you look at the arrow of the top here, you begin to realize, and this is our region, this is not just a national problem. This is a regional problem. It's our problem right now. The top bar shows age cohorts combined for all industries averaged across the 5 states. Now the top bar is what you want to see in terms of what the labor pool is out there in age demographics. It's pretty nice, pretty even distribution across these age groups. And note the large supply of people under 25 in blue on the left. Now that's the future workforce, especially those entering into those productive years of middle age. But for utilities in each of the 5 states, we are in fact top heavy and entry level light. So in all of the 5 states, 60% or more of all utility workers are 45 years of age or older, compared to 22% for all employment across the economy. So even if retirement numbers don't look as ominous as perhaps they did back in 2008, we still have a situation where the demographic trends for this industry portend some really serious potential problems. Ladies and gentlemen, I would offer up to you that we have a little problem. We have a muffin top, right? I mean, we have an issue here. Now, as an aside, I love Google. Google's a very powerful search machine. But if you go out and you Google muffin top, watch out what you get, because it's a little disturbing. So I don't recommend you try that. Don't go there. Just to add emphasis to this, now this is just for Washington, but this shows the change in age composition for Washington's population. Now, I prefer silver to black, but the trend at the top of these bars shows what's going to be happening over time. This is us moving further and further to older age. And look at the bottom. The bottom either shrinks or it grows a little bit, but it doesn't change all that much. Now, this is just to underscore the fact that our population is indeed growing older and not a lot of new people of younger age, of working age, coming up behind us. So if you don't think we have a problem, it's not so much just the industry, it's across the entire economy. And we have some real challenges we've got to deal with. So just to summarize that kind of piece of the data that we looked at, primarily based on national and state labor market information. Obviously, retirements are still upon us. They're likely to increase, and I would argue especially as the economy improves. Those who waited a while are perhaps even more ready than they were a couple of years ago to jump into something else, whether it's a condo in Puerto Vallarta or a timeshare in Sequim. Whatever you can afford, people are going to do something different. At the same time, we know there's going to be fewer people to replace those of us who leave. And they are highly sought after, the qualified ones, by many other industries. This isn't just about utilities. We know that we're going to have a more ethnically diverse labor pool to draw from because that's the source of much of the new population growth. Now that's a great thing. Diversity helps us be strong. The difficulty is that for many populations, they are underrepresented in higher education. They may indeed have further to go to be qualified to take the jobs that we're going to be leaving in the future. And at the same time, we're dealing with those pesky millennials that have a different idea about how they like to work. They're looking for opportunities that help them express their social and environmental values. Energy is a good avenue for that. But they also like untraditional organizations that give them more flexibility, They're very tech savvy. They have a lot to offer us, but they also have a different set of expectations. How are we going to deal with that will be a real challenge. So that's by way of offering some context. Now, I want to talk a bit about what employers from the 5 states said about jobs and about demand. Now, I want to point out that this is only for 9 specific occupations, primarily in our utilities, that were identified as very important through the interviews that we've had and some of the labor market information reviews that we've done. So it doesn't cover everybody. In 2008, we only looked at 5 craft occupations. This year, we expanded the survey to look at 9 occupations, including engineering, power systems operators, customer service reps, and energy efficiency program managers. So we definitely expanded that. The first finding is that in terms of current vacancies, and this is just a snapshot, but it's an important one, there's really a fairly modest number of current vacancies, 251 among all 15 of the employers that we surveyed. Now, last time we did this was with 276, and that was in 2008, but this is with more employers. And at that time, the largest was for people who were classified as technicians, which is a relatively large group, electricians, and line workers. Here, what we're looking at is somewhat of a shift, again, adding more occupations. The largest number was for power engineers, followed by line workers and customer service reps. Now, I was kind of expecting to see more vacancies for line workers, but there may be many reasons for that, some of you might guess. These numbers are just a snapshot, but I think it is at least one indication of what the current vacancy levels are out there. Again, some organizations we talked to had just hired, some were just opening positions, so this is imperfect, but it is at least a dipstick approach to figuring out what's out there. What was most sobering for me was this statistic, which is employers really don't anticipate hiring many new employees. This is for new positions over the next 3 years. Most of the growth that we saw was for mechanics and power engineers of those that we sampled. But if you look at the percentage growth, it is very, very small. This data is for all employment in the industry, not just for craft occupations. So again, we need to tease that out. And the reality was that one of these organizations accounted for most of the projected vacancies. One large governmental organization that shall not be named accounted for most of the projected new job growth over the next 3 years. So it seems to me that unless the additional data we collect suggests something different, in terms of new hiring for new positions, we're going to probably see a fairly flat trajectory over the next few years. And that seems to be relatively consistent with what we're hearing at the state level with state labor market data and at the national level as well. Now, when we asked about retirements over the next 5 years, we asked them to estimate for each occupation, independent of any new hires or current vacancies. And this is what they said. Here you see that employers estimated that about 14% of the current workforce is going to retire over the next 5 years. Well, that's over 1,100 people. That's a pretty good number. I think last time we did this, we had like 800 within 5 years in these 9 occupations. Now, the largest number you see here is for line workers with 319. But proportionately, the largest percentage in loss is going to be in power engineering, with 18% of the current workforce. The total numbers are smaller than for some of the other occupations, but again, the percentages are higher, and that is significant. What I found to be most interesting is that of all the retirements that our employer partners said they expected over the next 5 years, they also said they expected to fill all of them except 53. So it seems that, at least according to our employers, they definitely are planning on replacing those positions, for the most part, with very few exceptions. The other thing that was interesting for us to look at was the current support from apprenticeship system here in the state of Washington. We had, among these employers, 425 apprentices in place now, representing about 7% of the total workforce in the craft occupations that we studied. Now, in 2008, the number was about 10% of all craft occupations, so that's a slight decline. But that's probably not inconsistent, given the fact that we've gone through a 4 to 5 or 7 year recession, depending on your point of view, and that because we don't have jobs we can fill, we don't have as many apprentices in play. So in some respects, it makes sense to me. It requires a lot of effort, as you know, from existing employees to mentor apprentices and supporting the apprenticeship programs themselves. takes a lot of energy as well. But if we don't have occupations targeted for those apprentices, we're obviously not going to have as many in the pipeline. Just to summarize, for some of the key hiring challenges, when we asked what their biggest recruiting and hiring challenges were, the short story, which you heard earlier, is that even with the recession and many more people out there in the job market, the biggest challenge is that it's still hard to find and hire qualified applicants. Now, especially at the middle and experienced levels where most of this hiring is happening. There's not lots of new people being brought in at the entry level. It's in the middle where people are trying to plug holes, if you will. So this is where we are also hearing from employers that it's gotten even harder to look outside of the energy industry. Pat McCarty mentioned earlier, they used to take advantage of the fact that a mill would close because they get some qualified electricians or mechanics to bring in. Well, some of those mills and pulp and paper operations and other manufacturing companies have been closed for quite some time because of the recession. So that feedstock has dried up somewhat, getting even harder to find folks. Even though there's a lot of people out there, they're not the right people. Another comment we got was that, even if you do hire from outside of the industry, it takes a long time to socialize new employees to the culture of a utility organization, to understand how the systems work, understand how the job gets done, to try to acclimate those people to the new environment, over and above many of the technical requirements that are expected for the job. At the same time, we know that costs are going up because employers are having to look further afield to get the qualified people that they want. So, I don't know how many times I heard these stories of having one job, 500 applications, but only 5 or 10% of those who could even pass the test to go to the next level for interviews. This is a story that we hear quite a bit in this business. The most prominently mentioned strategy to try to rectify this is doing more advertising, but also trying to tap into our military veterans because of the fact that they've got some skills that they've acquired through the military training that are a good fit, but not always so easy to get them into the utility environment to make sure it's a good match. But certainly a great resource. Working conditions continues to be an issue. Now, this isn't so much about the nature of the work, it's often about the geographic location. Take somebody who's grown up in Seattle and stick them out in a substation in a remote part of the state. Where's the amenities? Where's the concerts? Right? Where's the fun? This is very difficult for people who are used to an urban lifestyle to relocate and be expected to be on call within, 30 minutes to be out to a site to take care of a problem. So for many employees, potential employees, this is a real culture shock, in addition to the fact that this can be very difficult and stressful work because of the nature of this industry. In terms of the hardest to fill, power engineers, line workers, power systems operators, some technicians, mechanics, and electricians led the list. There are many more. But again, this is where we're looking at hiring at more the mid-level, experienced level. As you heard earlier, we need people with experience. That is leading the way. Not lots of new entry-level hires in this industry at this time. Computer software use, IT-related knowledge and skills, surfaced as a much more important skill set generally than we heard in 2008, even though it was important then. People are really hammering on that idea, having comfort with computer systems, applications, knowing how to use technology in a meaningful way, because let's face it, our jobs are becoming much more technology dependent, even in just the last 4 years, than it was in the past. So in terms of some early findings, just to communicate to you before we go into the panel, obviously we had that little problem with the recession. The energy industry is an industry like many other companies that suffered during the recession. Demand for power was down. That had an effect on operations in our power companies. Many of them had to right size. Many of them still are trying to adjust to make sure that they've adapted to customer demand. And even with the uptick in the economy, it may take some time before we see that wheel pick up motion. Retirements we know are imminent. We may not know exactly how many or when that will happen, but we know they're coming. Replacement concerns have resurfaced as a big issue for many of the folks I talked with, including those on the panel. And there's fewer vacancies, especially at that entry level, which means there's essentially no room at the inn to bring in that new blood unless it's through an apprenticeship program. So I think there's some issues to be addressed there. The current largest openings in terms of proportion, again, are power engineers, line workers, customer service reps. Where there are openings, these tend to be the areas that are hottest across the region. And there's much greater reliance on technology and automation, as I mentioned earlier, but I think what that equates into generally is a rising knowledge and skills bar. Expectations from our employer partners that they really need people that are comfortable, that have that high-tech knowledge and skill set to carry us forward. So related to that are some of the other research findings that came on early in the Smart Grid DOE grant, that when we began to talk to employers about jobs, lattices, career trajectories, and so forth, these are some of the things that came out of those discussions. One is that many of these jobs seem distinct. You know, an operator you'd think at one company would be the same as an operator in another. Not true. Generally it's true, but there are lots of shades of operations that happen between companies. These jobs often are changing. We're seeing more multi-skilling happening where that's possible, taking on new responsibilities of flatter organizations. And these occupations clearly vary among employers in terms of how they're constructed and the expectations that they have. But I think perhaps the most interesting, important finding that relates to this labor market information is that Smart Grid is really requiring more information technology, data management and analysis, and communication skills. We've all heard the term big data. Well, it's not just for IT. It's happening in all of our organizations. And as we launch into more grid modernization, the expectation is that not just engineers, but customer service reps need to be able to answer those questions from customers about websites, about demand use, about how to interpret their user information. So it's cutting across many different sectors in our own utilities, but it has surfaced as a kind of a general implication as we look across the board. So these new technologies are involving and requiring higher IT and communication skills. It implies, and this is true in many of the interviews we've had, a premium on folks who have interdisciplinary understanding and skill. Being able to look across disciplines, not just be a specialist in one specific area. We need those too, but those who can look across the system, have a foundational understanding of how the energy systems work, and understand the need not just for components, but for integration to make this grid modernization work. These are areas where we're seeing engineers and IT and technicians working more closely together instead of in silos than ever before, because they must. These are integrated systems that require that level of cooperation. So it seems to me that as we continue grid modernization in all its various forms, we'll see that these expectations are probably going to continue. So the next steps in this research, again, we're not quite done with all the data collection and there's much more analysis to do, is we'll complete that. We'll finish the analysis. We want to feed this back to the participants who provided the data. We need to have that reality check and verification by the industry before we take it forward. And then a final report will be produced, and I think we're going to try to publish that and have it available on the website also in August. So that's just by way of setting up our panel to talk about some of these issues and I've spoken with each one of them about what are their concerns, what are some of the issues they're seeing in their own organizations. So I want to introduce our panel. And I did mention that Angelique Keaveney was not able to be here today. She was so disappointed because she said she spent hours preparing for this panel. I almost told her to send her notes, but she was busy. Yeah. So to my left, I want to introduce Heather Burns, who's the Director of Human Resources with Northwestern Energy in Montana. And to her left is Maureen Fault. And I've spoken with Maureen over several years now, and it's always a pleasure to have her join us in this work. She's Organizational Development Consultant for Portland General Electric. And Heather Rosentrader, who I had the pleasure of having a couple conversations with as part of the data collection for our Smart Grid demonstration interviews, who's the Director of Engineering and Systems Operations at Avista. And I want to thank Diane and Mike, of course, for the heavy lifting that Avista always does, but also in supporting Heather to be here today. I think it's a great addition to have three powerful women and an engineer to boot on our panel to give their perspective. So what I've asked each of our panelists to do is to give a short overview of kind of their organization, the job that they do, and then I've asked them to give us some reflections based upon the data I've already presented kind of their perspective on what stands out about the data that they think is interesting or important. And then we'll go into hopefully a conversation about some of the key issues that come out of that and some other questions that we have. So, Heather Burns, would you like to start?
I could talk a little bit about our business just to start with. Northwestern Energy is a provider of gas and electric services to not only Montana, but South Dakota and Nebraska as well. We serve over 650,000 customers, and we serve more than 450 communities, so we're very geographically dispersed. We have close to 1,500 employees. And one of the major challenges that we have is, unlike, say, a utility in a major metro area, all of these resources that might turn over potentially are the guy in their town, or are a particular specialty in a particular region. So we have serious issues with establishing redundancy to the, you can't have 100% redundancy, and doing the predictive modeling to figure out, who do you need redundancy with when. Not more than you need, not less than you need, just what you need. And that's very difficult.
Great. Thank you. Maureen?
My company, Portland General Electric, is the largest supplier of electricity in Oregon. We're in northern Oregon, but dispersed around the state, so we have some geographic diversity as well, and some pretty small projects. We have about 900,000 customers, many of whom are high-tech, so we're very sensitive to their needs in providing service. And we're a pretty traditional fully integrated electric utility. We just announced the building of 2 new gas plants and another very large-scale wind plant. So we are trying to replace the nuclear plant that we shut down a number of years ago, which is interestingly where I started my career. And I have to say, driving out here, I haven't seen a cooling tower in a long time. The needs that we have are very reflective of Alan's research, and we, for the first time now, are starting to see people retire. And I think that what has happened in our company and maybe in the industry because of the recession, which affected Oregon and Washington so greatly and much longer than the rest of the nation, is that we just have this complacency. Somehow, I think our managers think that people never will retire now, and of course the bubble is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we now have some believers within the company that people will leave, and so we've been focused as much as we can on knowledge transfer and pipeline development with our different partners, both at the community college and the university level.
Thanks, Marie.
So I'm from Avista, as was mentioned, and Avista is a vertically integrated utility as well. We have generation, transmission, and distribution serving the customers, and we have about 360,000 electric customers and about 340,000 gas customers. The electric customers are in eastern Washington and northern Idaho, and our gas customers are in eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and in southern Oregon. And I've been at Avista for about 17 years. I started as a student when I was going to Gonzaga University. I was lucky enough to get in before my sophomore year and start in the industry, and that's what I would recommend to anybody, any power engineer that's in school, is do your best to get an internship in the industry. That's going to be your best opportunity to get in as an engineer once you've graduated. So go knocking on those doors, call the HR department, ask for a contact in the engineering department. And from what I've seen, most people that, if I get a call that somebody wants to meet with me, I'm happy to talk to them about the industry and about, what skills we're looking for. So I would just encourage that. And I'm the Director of Engineering and System Operations, so I have the transmission and distribution groups. I have about half of the engineers at the company. There's also generation engineers that are a separate group and gas engineers that are a separate group. But we do have a chiefs engineering group at the company, so we try to keep, we meet periodically to just try to keep consistency with the engineers at our company and talk about hiring needs and just development of our engineers and making sure we're providing consistent support across the company for those. And then, as Alan mentioned, the smart grid projects, the two that Diane had mentioned earlier, are construction projects. We had a demonstration project we were involved in, the regional project with Battelle, and then we had an investment grant that we were the main leads on as well in Spokane. And so those projects were both in my group. So I was very involved with the hiring to ramp up the needs for that, and they were combined about $80 million worth of projects, and so there was definitely resource needs we had then, and I see that as such a, it was such a blessing to have at the time because it was kind of, I mean, as it was meant to be right when the recession hit, and coupled with this, we've been calling it a bow wave. I like the term the silver tsunami. We might try to bring that back to Avista, but it's, we've been talking about this bow wave. Our HR department has been trying to get us to focus on this bow wave of retirements for a long time now. And so that combined with this opportunity with our smart grid grants, we were able to hire in a lot of people in engineering, power engineering, in the crafts as well to help with that, fill that gap. We were able to get a lot of succession planning done then, training before. We've actually had quite a few of our engineers and our line workers actually already retire. I think we're already seeing that mass exodus. I feel like we're kind of in the middle of it right now at Avista. And so we had the opportunity to bring in people and get them trained up before we've seen some of those retirements go on. As far as our power engineering, one of the other things we were able to do is we had several with Agilent in Spokane closed down, and we've had several opportunities to bring in dislocated employees that had a lot of, I wouldn't say that dislocated employees that maybe they aren't power engineers, but they have a lot of transferable engineering skills. And so I would kind of count them as having that 4 to 5 years, or more experience that we're looking for when we're bringing them in. We just need to provide them other power engineering supplemental education to get them up to speed, and we were able to do that with quite a few of our engineers through the smart grid projects. We hired quite a few that were from other industries, and a lot of them actually went to a Gonzaga T&D. It was a certificate program, and now it's turned into a master's program that Avista partnered with Gonzaga probably 6 years ago they identified this need and created the program, partnered together, and then we have quite a few of our engineers. I'm one of them that's an adjunct professor in the program, and we've put a lot of our existing power engineers through the program, and then we've hired a lot of the engineers, these dislocated engineers that have gone there to get power engineering experience and training, and we've hired a lot of those into the company as well. So I feel like we're actually in a pretty good spot, considering, but not to get complacent with that. But a lot of the things you did say in the studies very much resonated with our experience.
It occurs to me, and we've thought about this a bit. For better or for worse, the ARA funding that did come into the state did allow us to be better prepared than perhaps we would have. And it did allow some organizations to do some additional hiring, which may have something to do with why we saw kind of a stabling effect across the utilities over the last several years. Maureen, you said something that I want to follow up on, and it's always been a question mark in my mind. How serious do you think this problem about retirements really is? And if it's true that we're being complacent about it, why is that? Why aren't we listening to the numbers? Do we have some alternative reality? Do we not believe that this is going to be a problem for us? Is that just the nature of our utilities?
One of the things that I think provides us with false comfort is that, at least at our company, and we're a little bit older than the industry average, we're 48, as an average, but people stay oftentimes 30, 40 years. And so I think we have a mindset that people are, even new people coming into the workforce are going to do that, and they're not. So the risk for us is the loss of institutional knowledge that will occur and will take years to replace. And you've heard other speakers talk about this. But the other thing that I think is going to impact us so greatly is in bringing on the replacement workforce, they will be so different than the workforce that we're used to. And what is our ability to onboard these people? What is our ability to train these people and to meet their needs in the workplace, and then to encourage them to stay and develop? So those, I think, are the real risks, and maybe the risks that are just a little bit beneath the surface that a lot of folks aren't thinking about. But when you have a wholesale replacement of your workforce, and for our company it is 50% by 2020, those are the kinds of things that we've got to do some planning around. And then, you know, I know we'll talk more about the smart grid, but the advent of those technologies and the two-way communication that they bring and the demands from customers really are, I think, pressuring us to change the way we are organized internally. Our internal organizational structure will need to change to be able to support that demand and all of the innovations that are going to come.
Great. I want to get back to that. That's a very good point. But I want Heather Burns to respond. And do you agree with that? Do you see it differently at your company? What about this transition? Is it false? Is it true? What do you think?
Well, I do think that the recession gave us a false sense of security, essentially sort of the golden handcuffs holding people, you know, in their roles and so forth longer than they would potentially have otherwise. But I also do see in our business, and of course, operating from the other side of the brain than most of the organization, I see that we've selected a lot of our leaders for their technical skills as opposed to their leadership skills, and therefore we've got them so tied up in technical operations that they have very little slack for things like organizational development and planning and so forth. They just literally don't have the bandwidth to spend on some of the leadership and management skills that we probably haven't really needed them to demonstrate for a lot of years. When they've worked for the same or with and for the same people for 30 years, this is not a problem that they, you know, our industry, we don't cycle through this all the time, so we haven't really honed those skills. We've even had a situation where, you know, our budgeting and our staffing is very tight, and we do that on purpose. We want to run an efficient business, and we've gone to the mat and gotten, you know, a backup employee in place, and that employee pulled the plug and the transfer hadn't happened. The knowledge transfer was not facilitated by that manager. And there are probably a lot of reasons that happened, but you want to make sure that you're executing properly on that opportunity and so forth. So I think there are a few things that play into whether or not you know, we're really putting our boots on the ground and addressing the issue. But
The question of knowledge transfer is always a curious one. We all know that it's important to do it. Do we do it too late? Do we do it at all? Maureen, what's your experience at PGE in terms of, you mentioned this at the outset, knowledge transfer is something we want to focus on. What's been your best successes at doing that? What comes to mind?
Yeah, our best successes have been in the area of engineering, and we have many partnerships with our four-year universities around us. We have some fairly deep and long-lasting internship relationships, and then we also have a summer hire program where beyond the year-long internships the partnerships that we have for engineers, we simply hire about, I think, 16 to 18 engineers in the summer. So we have a lot of exposure to new talent there, and we have a lot of commitment by our managers to make that happen. So this long-term strategy has really given us a hedge against, we hear about so many utilities aren't able to find engineers. We are able to find engineers. We're able to find diverse engineers and female engineers because we've had this long-term commitment. And what I hear from those new engineers is it's really great to be learning about a project, say at a power plant, from the person who built the power plant, because they've been there so long, and we just have a good ethic in that part of the company around knowledge transfer and bringing people on board and sharing knowledge. However, that we have pockets of our company where there isn't that understanding at all. Departments may not have even hired anybody for a very long time, and they've been out of the market. They don't even really remember what that process was like. They're not focused on what are the new skill sets going forward if somebody retires. They're still kind of focused on what the job used to be. So there are lots of points where we could be doing a much better job of knowledge management and transfer, but I think there has to be pain. I really think there has to be pain for people to be committed to it, so that it happens.
With all the focus on engineering, which I think we've seen emphasized a lot in the interviews that we've had, Heather Rosentrader, how do you think about knowledge transfer and the new people that you see that are coming in that are interested in positions in engineering, and especially from our women who are trying to break into the engineering field? What's your sense of it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we at Avista have actually changed our we used to have a rotational engineering program that we brought in the new recent graduates into, and they would go to a department for 6 months, and at that, historically, which we're just transforming right now into a different program, they would be really expected to create, to have a substantial project done at the end of the 6 months, that they're creating a deliverable. And now we're moving it more, we're calling an engineering development program instead of a rotation program, whereas we're expecting them to learn something. So they won't necessarily have a deliverable other than making sure that they learned the things that we expected them to while they were in the department. So a lot of times people would say, oh gosh, I've got to get this work done, compliance or something else, and I need just, a resource. And so you'd put them in there, and they really didn't get the full breadth of the department or understanding how it interconnects with the other departments at the company. And so we're really focusing on understanding, we're putting together checklists for each department of what are the skills or experiences they should get within each department, and making sure at the end that they have those, and having more periodic check-ins with them to see how it's progressing, and even having them present at the end of their 6-month rotation so they get that skill of, with engineering, a lot of times the stereotype is introvert or not skilled at presenting or speaking in front of people, and so to add that skill into their experience as well. So we've definitely recognized the need, and I don't think we have been doing the new engineers justice. And we actually, one of our newer engineers left the company, and I think that was maybe one of the pain that we felt that got us to think, oh yeah, we need to put a little bit more effort and thought into this.
Yeah, great, thanks for that. That's a great segue also to Maureen's comment about smart grid and what's different in our utility organizations given some of the demonstration projects. And you mentioned a few traits and qualities that you're expecting of your own engineers. Could you talk a little bit about how your experience trying to build and implement smart grid systems at Avista has changed your perspective on what the expectations need to be for new engineers and for others, other technician occupations?
Mm-hmm. And in our interview, I know I talked about this quite a bit, but just being able to work on a team effectively is so important, and understanding the importance of collaboration and having those just team skills. I was telling Diane before, just thinking about this, I was going over, in school that I think, okay, they need to do more teamwork. And I remember my one teamwork, my senior design project while I was in school, and that was probably the most challenging thing that I did while I was in college, and not in a good way necessarily. I mean, I did learn a lot from it, but I think that that's what you get a lot when you say, oh yeah, we need to put them on teams, but then so many of the people that I know are in school that get put on teams are like, oh my gosh, this is the worst part about it. And I think one of the things that the schools might be missing, and it sounds like maybe they're doing this more and more, is to give people the skills to work on teams, to do some team building activities, not just put people on a team and expect them to, again, create a work product, but help them learn how to work on a team. And I think we, for the Smart Grid project, the teams we had actually been working together for quite a while together, and so they already had those skills, and so it was a really, really good experience, and we had some different facilitation for our team building as well. But I don't think in school, especially in the engineering department, we didn't get a lot of those, team building skills taught to us.
Yeah, great points. Heather and Maureen, both of your organizations are steeped in some aspects of smart grid currently, and Portland General has been doing smart grid related metering for quite some time now. What's been your observation in terms of feedback you're getting from your managers, folks in engineering, about how those skill set expectations are changing? And then to what extent do you think that idea of expectation is permeating to other occupations, say craft jobs or management, or even on demand side occupations like CSRs or energy efficiency?
So in preparing for this, I had a chance to learn a little bit more about our smart grid demonstration project, which was a smaller project in our capital city, Salem, Oregon. It was about a $23 million project that essentially is an 8,000 square foot battery. And what we are testing in this battery is we're mainly testing energy storage, backup systems, and then integrating renewables, integrating some solar and wind installations that are located in this city, and then figuring out how to most efficiently work with both commercial and residential customers to better manage their power flow and more efficiently manage their power flow. So all of this, of course, is creating new learning for our incumbent employees. And when I interviewed one of the project managers, he was talking very much about some of the challenges that Heather was mentioning, that you're working in a team and you're pursuing something that you've never done before, so no one really knows how to manage you to this new project, except a good project manager, of course. But people were learning about each other from different parts of the organization, and energy companies are oftentimes very siloed, so we don't often work together as collaboratively as we could. So there was all of that relationship building and learning, and then the technological challenges. And so what I learned was that we did have to learn through mistakes, and it's a safe environment in a smart grid demonstration project to learn that. But I think some of the learnings we've had as a company is, if we're going to continue this work, and our customers are going to demand it, right? So if you just think about 10 years out, customers are very savvy. They are asking us to be able to provide things for them that we've never done before. So we are going to have to restructure our organization so that we have a better flow of ideas and more collaboration across departments. Our management needs to understand that, and we need to skill up employees to be able to do that.
Heather Burns, you have something to add to that?
I do. The commonality that we would have is that our very small smart grid project also involved the capital in Montana, Helena, and I think our business was very smart in getting some of our policymakers involved in the process and so forth. It's literally their offices that are, have the information gathering systems and so forth. So I thought that was great thinking on their part. But we essentially drew from our telecom techs, which already have kind of the base technical skills to do the installations that we needed. But the folks that were selected for the application specifically were folks who were able to learn quickly just because they have the technical skills. They hadn't worked with these specific devices, and were able to sort of adapt. They weren't the folks who might resist something new or a change, so essentially you had a selection process that folks emerged as kind of leaders in that regard. Willingness to jump in and try something new and be a part of this new technology. We also, if we could sort of step back from the tactical implementation of the program, there are lots of things about Smart Grid that are challenging our business quite generally. You know, you've got even things like contract negotiations and making relationships with new types of vendors. And you have things like analytical skills. You know, it's a bit of a gamble and it's risk-taking, and you know, we don't traditionally do those sorts of things. We're not rewarded for doing those things in our industry. You gamble with a new technology and you don't get a payback and you lose your shareholders. So I see, you know, the selection of appropriate technologies and the analysis on that level as being very important for us from a Smart Grid standpoint. We, in fact, have put together an emerging technologies group that essentially is a task force that's scanning the environment to see what technologies are bubbling up out there that, I guess this is a little bit beyond Smart Grid, but that could be a threat or an opportunity for our business. And that's really different for us too. And that might not be different from your utilities, but we have not traditionally been an R&D business. So that's been a change for us. But the other thing is Smart Grid being, you know, depending on the level of implementation or what you think of it as, you know, of course you have the system relay, you know, SCADA data and so forth that, you know, that's probably an obvious payback because you have less truck rolls and so forth. So your workforce will shift from, you know, less pole climbers and more data analysts. We all know that that's coming. But you also have the customer interface piece of Smart Grid, and how far do you go with that, like the Nest technology and that sort of thing. And we need to be able to understand our customers' wants and needs more effectively, probably than we've ever had to do. That's sort of the shift from, you know, the regulated industry to a more competitive model, and that's a huge, huge change for us and in terms of what we've been rewarded for over the years in our thinking. And you had mentioned sort of the innovation component of that, and we're trying really hard to seed that and kind of build that culture a little bit, but that's going to be very challenging for us over time, that it's okay to fail and it's okay to try something different and so forth. So
Well, I want to pursue that a little bit. You know, you've given us a good overview of how the markets are changing, customer expectations are changing, and we know a lot more about how technology is changing the way we provide our services to our customers. I want to focus for a minute on people inside of these organizations now, how they're affected by this. I was struck by the last panel. Somebody had mentioned that we're losing people from the industry because they don't want to deal with the technology. It's like, I'm done. I don't want to get a smartphone and have to figure all that out. I don't want to have to do that new application. You know, if I had my way, I'd still be using WordStar. But that's not the reality in modern organizations. We have to keep up. So I'm curious from your perspectives, how big an issue is that for people that are already in your organizations? And what are some ways you've found to help them get over the hump, to get with it, if you will, so they continue to contribute in a productive way?
I can talk to that. I mean, I think it's huge. I think it's huge. I think it's a huge change management opportunity, I guess, at the company, and that's what how we've seen it. And what we did at the very beginning of our smart grid projects is we actually found other utilities who were already doing it, and we tried to find the people that were maybe the biggest skeptics in the area or had the most influence on the groups, and we took a trip to the utility and said, okay, so why is this working here, and why wouldn't it work where we are? And let them talk to their counterparts at that utility and, ask all of the hard questions. And for the most part, they came back and they were the biggest advocates for it. It's kind of a group by group area. What you mentioned, the linemen specifically, and that's a big thing when they see maybe some of their job responsibilities getting eroded away by technology. And so we have to help them understand why it's a benefit to our customers, why it's a benefit to the company, and help them understand, yeah, you might be missing out on that, but look at all these other cool new skills you're going to learn, and let's focus on the future and where this is going. And they've actually responded really well to that. And the dispatchers as well have a similar scenario, that they're moving from people that are dispatching crews to actually operating the system with the equipment that we have out there. And so we're really working on informing them, educating them, training them, and just helping them understand the why. That's what we always keep going back to. Is at first, as an engineer, I'd go explain the what we're doing, and always got the question, well, why are we doing this again? And so continuing to go back to the benefits and for our customers and to stay competitive, the why, I think, is really important as well.
Well, and just as an aside, I had a great interview with somebody at Avista whom you might know, who's supervising the line side, who said that at first we had lots of resistance from people who had never used a laptop, who had never used advanced software. But now they're asking for it, and they're excited when there's a new application that will help them do their job better and easier. It takes time.
And I would agree with that. One of the things with our system mapping, nobody really liked going back through the maps and why do we have to enter the data and so forth. But once you can hook them with what's in it for me, and when they see that it does make their job easier, then suddenly you've developed that appetite and they want more of it. But I would also say, in terms of, you have a push-pull with retention and efficiency, and you have to, at some point, retention has diminishing returns, and you have to allow that turnover to happen to refresh your business. And we have had some people that have decided to move on at the point that a change happened, and it provided a really good natural progression point for folks. We've also been challenged by our board to look at retirements as an opportunity to restructure, to become more efficient, and if there are ways to reallocate those jobs, is that the point at which you do make those technology changes so that you're not necessarily always, swimming uphill with change management, although you always have a certain degree of that.
Yeah, great. I want to switch focus to people who are interested in this industry, because it's always an issue. It's always an issue to draw people into the energy industry because they don't understand it. And once we get them in, it's always an issue, as you heard the young man at the prior session say, look, I'm interested, but I don't have experience. How do I get that experience? And Heather Rosentrader, you mentioned earlier, internships, trying to figure out creative ways to get in the organizations early to have those experiences. But I'm wondering, aside from that, are there other strategies that any of you would say, if you really want to learn more about this industry, you really want to position yourself for entry, what are some things that you've found to be successful in some of the new hires that you've gotten?
I would just say that what's helping us the most are our partnerships with community colleges and universities. And we would love to be able to reach out more at the K through 12 level, and we do some of that, but we're just frankly so limited resource-wise. It's hard to make a big impact there. But through specific partnerships with, in our case, Clackamas Community College has a workforce readiness program that helps us identify folks who would be appropriate for apprenticeships on the line and the substation side, and then the universities both in Washington and Oregon on the engineering side. Those long-term relationships that we have with those institutions, and then some of our incumbent employees actually teaching in these programs where they can meet and get to know these students and know who has both an aptitude and a real interest for our careers. But we've really also looked at changing what we're looking for when we hire, and you've probably, like I have, read lots and lots of studies, and the studies say that you want to hire employees who are resilient, you want to hire employees who are lifelong learners, you want to hire people who can work in teams. All of those things are really true, and no matter how skilled you are, once you get into the workplace, you are going to be challenged with changes. I just think about the sweeping enterprise-wide technology changes we have going on in our company that are really, truly draining us, challenging us, stretching employees, and there are employees who just say, I don't want to go there. That's just not the workplace that I envisioned, and then other employees saying, yeah, this is great.
And that brings me to another question that I think is central on many people's minds. I mean, we have a number of folks who represent our universities, our colleges, and other training organizations, including apprenticeship. As you think about the changes this industry is undergoing, the new skill expectations, the limitations in terms of budget and training resources, what recommendations might you have for our education and training partners about the best way to tap in to what it is you're seeing in terms of changes and your priorities for changes going forward? What's worked best for you? Is it that face-to-face? Is it some other constellation of information and connection that has worked well for you? What's been the best avenues?
Well, we on the engineering side, we partner with a lot of the utilities for their senior design projects. So on our, in our location, we're working with Gonzaga, University of Idaho, WSU, and that's actually where we've hired a few of the engineers that they didn't work for us as a student intern, but they were on a senior design project for us, and we could just see the positive attitude, their willingness to learn, and just interest in the power industry, and hired them through that as well.
We have worked with, we basically did a study to figure out which schools are supporting our professions, but which schools do we actually hire our candidates out of? And we found a pretty clear pattern. So we've established some scholarship programs that target particular roles and to include, everything from power operations to welding. Actually, is one of the skills that we have a really hard time incorporating into our business or finding candidates for a number of reasons. I could talk about that in a panel too, but I think that having that relationship with those universities and getting those interns in place. For example, one of the things that we'd like to do next year is a petroleum engineer. We know that they're, particularly where we are, very scarce, and in order for us to be competitive, we have to have that relationship up front. But I really do think that you need to collaborate with those sources that are feeding your pipeline, and keep in contact with them to develop the programs that work most effectively.
Maureen, do you have thoughts on this?
Just one more angle, because I can't stress the benefits of internships, or in our case, we have both internship arrangements, formal ones with universities, but we also have a summer hire program where engineers and many other positions in the company just need summer workers, and so a student can come in and learn about those parts of the business. But the benefits to the departments who have interns are great. They learn what the new skill sets that these students are picking up in school that we may not have. I think most of the students that we hire are very inspiring. They seem to buck the trends of what you hear about the new workforce coming in. They're usually very motivated, very communicative, hungry to learn, great team players. And so I think it creates a lot of energy and knowledge transfer, and raises the bar for us, even at the same time that our real goal is to identify new talent. But we've also started some internship programs, or excuse me, scholarship programs, one with Oregon State University that we started just 2 years ago. And what we did was we matched up the scholarship recipient with an engineering buddy. So they have a mentor inside the company so that while they're going through school, they can come and visit us in our business, but they have this ongoing mentorship. And a lot of times it's just email and phone, but they have a contact with a real life engineer inside the company. So I think it's just really invigorating and beneficial in many more ways than just being able to hire a student.
And those mentorships are also a great strategy for knowledge transfer.
Exactly.
Assuming that those students do well. Well, I want to go to a closing question that I posed to the panel, and that is, what recommendations or advice would you have? And it could be at the policy level, it could be to your utility colleagues, or it could be to our educators and training organizations here in the audience today. What recommendations would you have that you think would help this industry assure that it's got a qualified, skilled workforce as we move into this future of more technology, maybe more specialized skills, and a broader set of expectations about knowledge going forward?
I can go ahead and start. I think just continuing the partnerships that we have, I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do. I forgot to mention the scholarship program that we have as well, because we did change that. We had called it a Minds in Motion scholarship and had a broad criteria of who we gave it to, and we were finding that out of several years that we had it, we had 0 of the recipients actually come to work at Avista, and so reformatted that, and in the last 4 years, I think we've hired 4 that have had that. So I think, the utilities looking at scholarship programs that are appropriate, and just supporting the universities, keeping that relationship with senior design projects, with internships, and just learning from each other. We, as part of our demonstration project, we partnered with WSU to do a lot of our analysis for us, and we're learning from them and they're learning from us, and I think that's really important going forward to continue that focus.
Great, thank you. Maureen?
I would just reiterate the importance of partnerships. Everything right now is about collaborative partnerships. And we know that as an industry, we have a need to get out there in the education system and be clear about what our careers are and how educators can help their students skill up for our careers. And to the extent that we can partner directly with them, that's really the best way. The other thing is, I think you need to have management within your own organization who are true believers and support that kind of outreach, and the fact that these partnerships are most effective when they are long-term. It's really about relationships, and to invest in those relationships takes support from, so I would challenge our management of our companies to continue to support that.
Great.
And I can agree on a number of points. Certainly the relationships are very important, and you want to have your leadership supporting your outreach. And I would say past that, you want leadership in your businesses that support the concept of development, because it's a lot like building something like this. It's not something that happens overnight. You have to have that. You cannot waver in your commitment to development. You have got to fund the programs. You've got to walk the talk. You've got to allow people the time to do the development activities in addition to their transactional or their operational responsibilities. And I think we will have to continue to increase our sophistication in our predictive modeling of what's going to happen with our workforce so that we know who's going to be where when. I think that's a pretty good summary of what I think we need to do to be prepared.
Great. Thanks very much. It's been a very insightful panel session, lots of good information and some great ideas.